Primes versus zooms. Hot topic, lot to talk about. Where do we start? Well, first of all, let's start with what they are. So you might, if you're not familiar with what a prime lens is, a prime lens is basically a fixed focal length. So you will see people talk about a nifty 50 or a 35mm, an 85mm, a 135, something like even a 11mm or a 16mm. That basically means that they cannot be zoomed. Now, what's the benefit of that? Like, what's the point? Well, mainly it's because there's no zoom motor in there. There's no motor that changes the focal length. What you can then do is really widen the aperture. So you're able to have a really wide aperture. This is my 35mm 1.4. Now the optics on this are really, really nice, and that's something that you don't really get as much as you would in a zoom. Now there are extenuating circumstances. Some zoom lenses are amazing. This is one of them. This is a great lens. This is a 16-35. Now this is an f4, so this will not, the aperture will not be able to be reduced further than f4. But you might be thinking, well, I don't ever shoot below f4, so I don't need one. And you'd be right to think that. If you don't shoot below f4, what's the point in owning a prime lens for double the price sometimes? Well, let me just talk through a couple of scenarios where prime lenses will come in really handy. So first of all, I'm going to talk about almost like what we'd call in the field photography, or not in a field. Let's start with astro photography. When we shoot the stars and we want to get detail out of the night sky, you will notice that f11 just won't cut it. You will need to do an exposure way too long, and you'll start to get blurry stars, and you need to drink in more light. Now, when you open up the aperture more on a lens, you drink in more light. Now, with a 1.4 lens, you can do that really nicely. You can shoot the night sky at 1.4, 1.6, 1.8, 2.8. For me, the sweet spot is around 2.8 to 3.5. Because sometimes two things happen. When you stop the aperture down too far, I say too far, all the way down to 1.4, sometimes you do it just because you can, but when you stop it down to 1.4, two things happen. The first is your plane of focus becomes so narrow that the slightest nudge on the focus ring can knock everything out of focus, and you can really mess up your shot. Hence the need for things like focus stacking and several blended exposures. And another thing is, when you stop the aperture down all the way to like 1.4, you'll start getting things called color fringing, and you'll start not being able to get the absolute optimum quality out of the lens. Now, the same thing can be said for zoom lenses. At f4, this still happens, not to the same degree that you'll notice it in a 1.4 lens, but a lens like this is f4 the whole way through. So what I mean by that is from the range of 16 all the way through to 35mm, I can select f4 on my camera. So would I use this for astrophotography? No, I'd actually go for the 35mm lens, and I'd probably just do panoramas instead of choosing a wider lens, because I don't own a prime super wide lens. So that's the way I get around that. Now, zoom lenses come in really handy for things like landscape photography, where we don't need super shallow depths of field. I use this 16-35mm for lots and lots of my landscape stuff. The quality on this lens is really good, so I'm really fortunate in that respect. And in my personal opinion, do you need a prime lens for landscape photography? To me, the answer would probably be no, because the most of the time we're shooting at apertures around 6.3 to f16, in that area, in that ballpark. Yes, it's always nice to have the quality of a prime lens, but at those apertures, it's negligible. I don't think you can really see it. Where these things come into their own, as I alluded to with Astro Photography, is low light. So if you're a practicing professional, or you're thinking about getting into professional photography, weddings are a great example. We're taking portraits and we're working in low light scenarios. So you can achieve super fast exposures. Now, prime lenses are called fast lenses sometimes. So what does that mean? Well, because we can open up the aperture so wide, that will enable us to really shoot at the top end that our camera will allow us. So instead of shooting at f4, let's just be hypothetical and say, you know, 1/500th of a second. Is 1/300th of a second even a value? I don't know. 1/320th, I think. And with a prime lens, if I'm shooting at 1.8 instead of f4, I could probably shoot at 1/4000th, maybe even 1/8000th of a second. So I can get a really sharp, pin sharp photo. And if your camera's any good, you can probably rely on its autofocus system that it will nail the autofocus. So that's why they're called fast lenses, because they can be opened up really wide to enable you to shoot at a really fast shutter speed. It's nothing to do with the autofocus speed, because some prime lenses like my 85mm Mark I are actually quite slow to focus. So that's what that means. So I shoot a lot of property photography. So would I recommend having a prime lens for that? Maybe. It's not necessary, it's not essential, and I actually very rarely, and when I say very rarely, I never even bother taking a prime lens to my photo shoots when I do property. I'm always using my 16 to 35mm lens for internals and externals, and if I'm even further afield than 35mm can capture, I'll stick on the 24 to 105 and I'll zoom right in. So you don't always need a prime lens. So apart from the obvious things that I've mentioned about opening up the aperture, the faster shutter speeds that are available, if your camera is amazing at capturing low light because of its ISO performance, like if you've got a full frame mirrorless camera, do you need a prime lens? Well, unless you like super shallow depths of field, the answer would have to be no. I don't think you need one. For me, I like razor sharp depths of field when I'm shooting portraits at weddings. I love shooting astro photography, so again, I love the ability to shoot with a really wide aperture. So I definitely need prime lenses. But I'd be interested to hear from you. Do you need prime lenses? Have you ever bought a prime lens and thought, this is just collecting dust on my shelf? Do I actually need one? Or are you thinking the other side of the flipped coin? Are you thinking this prime lens can take my photography to the next level? I'm bored of the results that I'm getting from my zoom lenses. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on prime lenses versus zoom lenses. So I should have said at the very beginning, I'm not an expert at the optics of camera lenses. I'm just talking about my own experiences with these lenses over the years. I've had prime lenses now for probably about 5 or 6 years. The zoom lenses were the first things that I learned photography on, and then I quickly moved on to the nifty 50, wanted something a bit wider, so I got the 35mm, and then the best lens that I own is the 85mm. Once you've shot with an 85mm prime at a wedding, you will never ever want to use anything ever again. In fact, at a wedding, I only shoot with the 35 and the 85mm lens on 2 different camera bodies. I don't even take any other lenses. Well, I do, just in case something goes wrong with the lens. But those 2 lenses stay on the 2 cameras all day, and I mean all day. So thanks for watching this video. I hope that's made sense to anyone that doesn't really speak the lingo of prime lenses and zoom lenses and things like that. And yeah, I'd love to hear your experience with the lenses that you're working with at the moment. And what are you looking at getting next? Are you going to treat yourself to a a sexy prime lens, or maybe you're really happy with your camera's ISO performance, so you don't need that super wide aperture, so you're looking at getting a new zoom lens. So let me know what you're thinking of getting. I'd love to hear from you. So as for this video, thanks for watching. I will see you on the next video, whatever that may be about. Hope you're taking it easy, and I'll see you soon.
Since I've seen the sun could be bright again.